Today is Tuesday, September 10th, and that is World Suicide Prevention Day. If you've listened to the show before, you've probably heard me talk about my own bouts with deep depression, suicidal ideation, and the time that I plan to take my own life. So I want to talk about some of the taboos that we still have culturally around suicide, some of the ways we talk about it that I think are harmful, and more importantly, some of the things that I think we can do differently to help people who are struggling. I'm Zach Van Nuss, and this is Grinding to a Halt. In past episodes, I've gone over the statistics around suicide, around the rates of increase that we have seen year over year for a long time now, not just in America, but across the world. And specifically, suicide rates among men aged 18 to 60 have seen steady growth. Some of the key numbers I want to call out just as we're talking about this now is data from 2022, where suicide was the 11th leading cause of death in the United States alone, and there were just under 50,000 reported suicides and 1.6 million estimated attempted suicides. So massive numbers, but it's still something that people don't really talk about. It's still viewed as shameful. It's viewed as some sort of failure on the person's part. And I think all of those things are so deeply harmful and just compound the issue. As someone who planned to take my own life back in 2021, since then I have felt a need, really, to talk more openly and more clearly about the mindset I was in, what that situation was like, and ways that I have tried to keep those thoughts at bay. They are still very much a part of me. I have dealt with depression my entire life. I have dealt with suicidal ideations for as long as I can remember, but they all culminated in one point in May of 2021 where it felt like that was the only option for me that made sense. And that's one of the things that I think is really misunderstood, at least in my case. And I am clearly not a professional in any of this. I am just a person who has dealt with it and is currently dealing with it and will navigate it for the rest of my life. But when it switched from being something I thought about as escape's not the right word, but I think that's the word that probably makes the most sense to people. But relief. The idea of suicide for me was an idea of relief. And when it went from being an idea to being something that logically made sense, in my brain there was a switch that flipped. And it was an epiphany of, oh yeah, no, that's what I have to do. That is the option. And it was, and this is the scary part, it felt good to know that I wouldn't have to continue. And so all these conversations around somebody being selfish, of suicide being a selfish act, I think is so deeply rooted in a misunderstanding of what a person is dealing with. And it comes from people not talking about their experiences. And I understand that it could be uncomfortable for people to talk about. It's not for me. I don't give a shit. I think it's important to talk about, but I also don't care how anyone views me for talking about it. I think it's fucked up if anyone judges someone for admitting that they were struggling. And part of the conversation I want to have is about how we have told people not to talk about these things, that there is this stigma of suicide is a weak act, that depression is something you get over, that if you take a pill or you say the right prayer or you have the right God, that depression can be cured. And that's just not true for most people. It is something that they live with. It is the chemistry of their brain, and it is 100% the chemistry of my brain. So it's not about finding a way to solve the problem. It's about accepting that that is part of who I am, and that it is part of how my brain works, and that I have to navigate around it. And if I can have those conversations with people, if people can understand that, yeah, I can go from being on a work call and being super happy and everybody enjoying being around me, and then when I get off that call, I rest my head on my desk and I don't know how I'm going to do the next one because I feel so deeply empty inside. that I have to put forth all my energy to feel like I'm normal, that I'm maintaining this baseline. That for me is what depression and suicidal ideation looks like. It looks like excitement. It looks like happiness. And then when no one's looking, I crumbled. And in May of 2021, I crumbled hard. And now that I'm on the other side of that, and that I made it through that situation, and I got better in the ways that I could, I think it's important that I talk about it and say I was not weak in that moment. I was desperate. That I was not being selfish. I thought I was helping the people around me by killing myself. To me, in my brain at that moment, it made perfect sense that my wife and my kids would be better off without me because I was a burden. And if that burden was removed, their lives would be better. I know that's not true. My brain was telling me it was true. And that's where things get dangerous, is when we can't say we're feeling these things without judgment. When we can't have that conversation because we feel like people will think less of us. So I will continue to talk about it. I will continue to talk about my experiences. But I also think it's important to talk about culturally how we're viewing things. And mental health is a topic that gets spoken about a lot, whether it be on podcasts or on every social media channel. There's influencers who will talk about these things. But the language that is used, I think, is almost as damaging as not talking about it. Because when I put this out and I have suicide in the title and I say suicide a bunch, I know that the algorithms will not want to pick it up. There's a reason people use terms like unalive, because suicide hurts your performance online. I think that takes some of the power away from saying the word. We're still treating it like a bad word. And by treating it like a bad word, we're keeping it taboo. So we have to say suicide. It can't just be unalive. I think self-harm is one that people use a lot, but suicide is an act of self-harm, but not every act of self-harm is an act of suicide. And so I still think it's important that we differentiate the two when we're talking about these things, because they are different and people's experiences with them are different. There can be people that are self-harming that have no interest in suicide at all. And there are people who do not commit acts of self-harm, myself included, outside of planning to kill themselves. I was never a cutter. I never did anything like that. There was no harm I inflicted on my own body because it never made sense to me. That's not what I was looking for. But I still planned to kill myself. So I think these are things that we're conditioned not to talk about in a way that is the most effective way to talk about them. So it'll probably hurt the performance of the episode to say suicide 400 times. It will probably hurt the episode to have suicide in the title, but I think it's important that I do it, even if it hurts performance overall, because I'm saying the words. I'm normalizing those words by using them. I want to break the taboos of these things, because suicide is on the rise and it doesn't need to be. If people would just talk about it, it would save so many lives. I'm here because my wife called me. If my wife hadn't called me, I would be dead. I have zero doubt about that. Because there was a conversation that needed to happen that I didn't feel like I could have. It's not her fault. It was my fault for not coming to her with the conversation that I needed to have. And now I can have those conversations. I can check in on those things. That wall was broken down because it was spoken about. So I will keep posting about suicide. I will keep talking about suicide. I won't change the terms that I'm using because I think it's important to use the proper term for what we're talking about. So if you're out there, if you hear this, if you're struggling, I don't have all the answers. I can tell you it helps to talk about it. I can tell you that someone will want to listen, even if it's just a hotline, and I will put a link to those hotlines in the show notes. But just calling someone, telling them what you're thinking about, speaking it helps de-escalate quite a bit. Putting those words out there, for me, it helped wake me up a little bit into what I was actually thinking about and what I was actually planning to do, because all of it had been internalized. And the dangers of those internalized thoughts when your brain is already telling you to do something you should not do is really bad. So being able to speak those things. There are resources out there. There are people that want to listen. Even if you don't have them in your personal life, but you probably do. If you can build that trust with someone to have the conversation, it goes a long way. Once you get to a point where you feel like you're healthier, find ways to maintain that health. Say no to things that are harmful to you. Find ways to do things that make you feel like you. For me, that was one of the biggest things, was I wasn't doing anything for me. I felt all this responsibility that I had put on myself to be a provider, whatever bullshit that means, to be a good husband and a good father, but never taking the time to just like be Zach and just sit and be myself and do things I wanted to do, even if that meant saying no to the people I care about. Of, hey, I can't do this thing with you or for you right now because I have to go do something for me. That loss of self makes it easier to fully lose yourself. So take care of yourself, focus on things you care about, and talk to people when you need it. I can't say that I am here for everybody because I can't be emotionally. I don't have the capacity to do that. But if you have questions, if you want to talk about it, shoot me an email. If I don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to help, I can find people that can. So send me an email, DM me on socials. Let's get a conversation started. I hope that going into 2025, by the time we get to September 10th of next year for World Suicide Prevention Day, that we will see those statistics go down. I know realistically that's probably not what is going to happen, but I hope we can have conversations about it, that we can change some of the way things are spoken about culturally, the way that people view suicide needs to change culturally. And I hope that if you're in a bad space mentally and you hear this, that you know you can get to the other side. I did. You can too.
Thanks for listening. Give it 5 stars, because my dad is awesome and cool.